Georgia man convicted of intentionally leaving his toddler in a hot SUV to die will soon learn his fate. A judge is set to sentence Justin Ross Harris today. Last month, jurors convicted Harris of malice murder in the June 2014 death of his 22-month-old son. He faces life in prison. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty. The city of Gatlinburg, Tennessee is planning to reopen for business this week after those deadly wildfires. Officials in the popular tourist area say they're working right now to assess infrastructure damage. In all, 14 people were killed in last week's fires. More than 130 others were injured. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced he will visit Pearl Harbor, Hawaii later this month. It is the first time a Japanese leader has visited the site since the attack there almost 75 years ago. Nearly 2,400 people died in the attack, which compelled the United States to enter World War II. Usually hockey fans would get kicked out for throwing stuff onto the ice, but not so last night. Those are teddy bears, thousands of them, hitting the rink during last night's Hershey Bears game, and they just kept flying. The team collecting more than 20,000 stuffed toys for charity as part of their annual teddy bear toss. That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Carol Costello. At this hour with Berman and Baldwin starts now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. John Berman is off today. Donald Trump hasn't yet chosen his Secretary of State, but he may have already given the mystery nominee a few major to-dos and maybe a slight headache to deal with on day one. All weekend, the president-elect was fending off criticism for upending decades of U.S. policy by taking a call from the president of Taiwan. Well, now Trump is amping it up rather than trying to quiet it down, it seems, by unleashing on China in a Twitter attack that could set the stage for somewhat of a messy showdown. We're going to have more on that in just a moment. But first, there's also brand new this morning, one position that Donald Trump has filled as of this morning. His former rival turned supporter is now his nominee to head up the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Ben Carson becomes the first African-American nominated to Donald Trump's cabinet. Vice President-elect Mike Pence talked about Carson just moments ago.
We're excited to have Dr. Carson as our intended nominee for Housing and Urban Development. We're looking forward to another very productive week in the transition that's setting a historic pace.
Let's go live for more on this. CNN's Jessica Schneider. She's outside Trump Tower. So, Jessica, let's go back to China real quick. What is the transition saying this morning about the president-elect's comments?
Well, you know, Kate, they're not saying much, and what we can glean alone is from Donald Trump's conversation with the leader of Taiwan on Friday, as well as his subsequent tweets. Of course, that controversial call, a 10-minute phone call on Friday, and then a slew of tweets over the weekend criticizing China. But of course, Donald Trump is defending the phone call. He says it was a call that was made to him by the leader of China. And also VP-elect Mike Pence is defending the call as well, saying that this was just a courtesy call. But over the weekend, Donald Trump did in fact double down on his criticism of China, tweeting this. He said, "Did China ask us if it was okay to devalue their currency, making it hard for our companies to compete, heavily tax our products going into their country, the U.S. doesn't tax them, or to build a massive military complex in the middle of the South China Sea? I don't think so." Now, to be sure, Donald Trump did make many of these remarks when he was campaigning, talking about China devaluing its currency. But of course, now, with about 6.5 weeks to go until Donald Trump assumes the presidency, there is a lot of concern that this could be a new hostile era in U.S.-China relations. In fact, right after this phone call with the leader of Taiwan, Chinese officials scrambled, called the White House, tried to get some clarification, and there have been a slew of statements over the weekend from the Foreign Ministry of China. They haven't said much in particular, but they do say that they don't want to further scrutinize or analyze Donald Trump's actions or his tweets, and then continuing to reiterate that the policies that have stood with the U.S.-China relations over the past 4 decades, that they need to continue to stand to continue that relationship, in particular, that one China policy. So a lot of confusion here. Will this mean a change in policy? A lot to be seen, but definitely drawing some controversy over the past few days. Kate?
Jessica, also this morning, the transition is just saying, and it got a lot of people's attention, that Ivanka Trump is planning to meet with Al Gore today to talk about climate issues. That's a little surprising, to say the very least.
Yeah, you know, the future first daughter meeting with the former vice president, Ivanka Trump, may be making this one of her signature issues as well. It's something she hasn't really spoken out about. In fact, when we heard her at the Republican National Convention, she was focused on childcare, making that her platform. But it appears that she may be shifting or adding to. So yes, she will in fact meet with the former vice president, the former presidential candidate Al Gore, right here at Trump Tower. That meeting happening today. And when asked if Donald Trump himself might meet with Al Gore, the transition team said that's not scheduled at this point, but who knows. And in addition, Kate, it's interesting. We've learned that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are actually house hunting in D.C. It looks like that couple may make the move down to the nation's capital with their 3 children. That bearing questions as to what exactly Jared Kushner's role could be in the presidency. Of course, he's barred by anti-nepotism laws from actually taking on an official position, but we know that he's had Donald Trump's ear throughout this campaign as well as during this transition process. But yes, the Kushners perhaps going down to D.C. We learned that they are house hunting down there. Kate?
Well, and with the transition announcing this meeting between Ivanka Trump and Al Gore, it also renews questions of what is Ivanka Trump's role within the administration, the transition, because obviously Donald Trump has said over and over that the children are going to run the business. So this does raise a lot more conversation to be had. Jessica, great to see you. Thank you so much. Joining me now, CNN's chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto, who spent many years working in China, including as chief of staff and senior advisor to former U.S. ambassador to China. Richard Quest is host of CNN International's Quest Mean Business and is also editor-at-large for CNN Money. And Ron Brownstein is here, CNN senior political analyst and senior editor for The Atlantic. Guys, thanks for being here. Jim, first to you, the call between Donald Trump and the Taiwanese president. What is your take on the real impact now, especially as we saw in the Washington Post reporting this morning that this call was in the works for weeks, maybe months?
That's right. That fights the initial spin, right, which was this was just one of many congratulatory phone calls that Donald Trump received as opposed to arranged. Here's the thing. I spent a lot of time covering China and in China. China is extremely sensitive to the most minor shifts in rhetoric, diplomatic signals, policy shifts, etc. To have the president-elect tweet out what, and we know the way Donald Trump uses Twitter, this is as expressions of his policy positions. To have a president-elect tweet out 2 very, I don't know if antagonistic is the right word, but very firm statements, shall we say, on major policy issues between the U.S. and China, economic policy, foreign policy with the South China Sea, that signal a substantive shift from a bipartisan, decades-long bipartisan approach to China, right? I mean, on those issues, but also in terms of Taiwan. That goes back to 1979, recognizing Beijing as the seat of China as opposed to Taiwan. When that happens from the president-elect, that's major. That's substantial. And while China's public statements have been very measured, saying, well, this is a trade relationship that has benefited both sides, I have heard, and I think this is quite credible, that inside China's foreign ministry, inside the Chinese embassy down here the street from us in Washington, D.C., that there is genuine concern about what's next with the U.S. And that's significant.
And Richard, from your perspective, when you saw the tweet, Jessica read the tweet that Trump sent out over the weekend, directed obviously at China, saying several things. How do you describe the relationship between the United States and China, let's just say over the last 8 years under Obama, and what this kind of, do you think just these words is likely to change that relationship?
Oh, yes. I mean, that's, it has all the potential for doing that. You have to understand, I mean, very much as Jim was saying, the idea of all of this whole business of diplomacy and communication between countries is that we're both doing the same dance in the same direction. So I agree with you that we're both going to do the foxtrot, and we start to do it. And we may not do it very well, but hopefully, if diplomacy is right, eventually we are both gliding around the floor. But what Donald Trump is doing is, he is telegraphing to people who thought they were going to do the foxtrot that they're actually going to be doing the tango. And now the other side say, well, hang on a second, I thought we were doing the foxtrot. And somebody else says, well, no, I thought it was a rumba. Now, I give you this example, maybe it's an extreme example. The rules of diplomacy are there for a purpose. It means that when you sit down, you know where you're going and what you're doing. And that's vital in business. Who wants to commit billions of dollars of investment anywhere in the world, inwards or outwards, if you don't know?
And beside the fact that I have this beautiful image of you and I trying the foxtrot, the tango, and the rumba at the same time, which would be quite something for our viewers to see. Ron, let me get your take on this then. All of this in mind, what does that mean for Donald Trump's, at some point will be announced very soon, we think, maybe, his incoming Secretary of State? I mean, I found it interesting. I think probably everybody did as well. As this is happening, you have the former ambassador to China under Obama, the former Governor Jon Huntsman's name being kind of added to the list of candidates that are being considered.
Well, look, as Jay operation going on at the same time. And on the one hand, Donald Trump is clearly signaling a more on his doorstep, a giant Christmas package wrapped up as economic power in Asia, and allowing now China to fill the gap with their own regional free trade. Shares the same coordinates in their views of the world as Donald Trump, and is also credible as an international figure as Secretary of State. That is a narrow needle to thread, and I think you are seeing the difficulty of doing that play out as this process continues.
You can see some of that concern, Jim. I don't know if concern, but it's also questions are, of course, immediately going to Republicans on Capitol Hill. I heard Mike McCarthy he was asked by reporters about this on the Hill. Manu Raja tweeting out that McCarthy was telling reporters that...
very powerful metaphor there. And go from rumba to mosh pit, right? I mean, because that's the difference here, is that, you know, we're swinging blows on the dance floor here now. And the thing about that diplomatic dance, I've been answering a lot of questions on Twitter. They're like, well, why is it bad to stand up to China? You know, and I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a government official here, and I'm not making judgments about policy decisions. But the reason diplomatic language and communication matters is because it avoids wars, right? I mean, throughout history, this is the way difficult states with difficult relationships try to communicate important stuff without shooting at each other in the simplest terms.
And one other... Oh, sorry.
And that's why I was just going to say, and right now the U.S. and China have disputes that have the potential to escalate. One over the militarization of man-made islands in the China Sea, you know, trade issues, human rights issues, etc. So this kind of communication matters.
What is China doing?
And the important point also is we shouldn't be having these discussions at such level of detail until January the 21st, when the president-elect takes office. The US only has one president at each time. We're always told by both the winner and the incumbent.
But maybe that also, though, says that he hasn't done anything yet.
He has.
He's with these
Words
statements.
count.
Words matter. Well, a lot of people would say words played less of a for in this. The changing world captured in one image. I will put up the picture. A lot of folks have been pointing to this, as a lot of folks describing this picture taken less than a year ago. Gertrude's already laughing. Obama with the world leaders from the UK, France, Italy, Germany. This was taken in April 2015. Since then, just take a look around, especially after over the weekend. Angela Merkel's really the last one standing. Obama's on his way out. Hollande is not seeking re-election, and Renzi and Cameron have resigned or announced their resignations. What does that say about the world we're in right now?
It says that when you have a sustained period of slow growth in living standards, you got a lot of political turbulence no matter what country you are in. And, you know, what we have seen is this global backlash in countries across Europe and certainly in the U.S. election among a big portion of the electorate recoiling against trade and immigration as a kind of a target as an explanation for those slowly growing living standards. But as we saw in Austria yesterday, say that tide is not necessarily irreversible. And I think it is an enormous choice coming up, as Richard knows better than I, in France and Germany this year, with big elections at a time when Britain has already pulled back, when Donald Trump has signaled support for some of these kind of insular populist movements. Which way Europe turns in the next year is going to be a truly consequential choice, and one that is not entirely possible to predict today.
Guys, great to see you. Noteworthy, Ron did not make a dance metaphor.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you. Much appreciated. We're going to have more on our breaking news right now. That horrific warehouse fire in Oakland, California. The death toll rising this morning. Now 36 people are confirmed dead. And in the words of the Oakland fire chief, she absolutely believes the death toll will rise again. Overnight, they had to halt all search operations at the warehouse after finding the building unstable and at risk of collapsing on rescue workers there. CNN's Stephanie Elam is at the scene, joining us with the very latest. What are you hearing, Stephanie?
Hi, Kate. Well, at this point, the structural engineer should be on scene now, working to make sure that this building is safe for them to continue their recovery efforts and also to find out what started this fire. They do believe that they've isolated the place where the fire began. In fact, take a listen to what the Oakland Fire Battalion Chief had to say about that.
Where the steel is actually twisted and wrapped in the back of the building. We can see fire spread. ATF and our local investigators feel very strongly that they have identified the section of the building that is the area of origin.
And they're also hoping that after they're able to shore up the building, that the firefighters will be able to get back in there, investigators will be able to get back in there somewhere between noon and 4 p.m. local time, so that they can continue these efforts to recover victims. And as you said, they do believe that they will recover more victims inside of this building. A slow, painstaking process that they say will continue to move at this speed, simply because they do not want to miss anything. They do not want to miss anyone, despite the fact that rain is in the forecast for later on this week, Kate.
That doesn't help their efforts at all. Stephanie, thank you very much for keeping a close eye on that. And in minutes, I'm going to speak live with the city's district attorney, who is launching a criminal investigation into that horrific fire over the weekend. This is also ahead for us. An armed man walks into a pizza restaurant in D.C., fires a shot. Why was he there? He wanted to self-investigate a fictitious news story, conspiracy theory involving Hillary Clinton. I'm going to speak live with a witness who was inside the restaurant when this happened. And right now, the jury in the trial, the South Carolina officer charged with murdering Walter Scott. The jury is back in the room after one of the jurors refused to join in the majority. Hear about the note he sent to the judge.